Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress. Only 9 days now till the World Championship match between Carlsen and Caruana will kick off on November 9th in London. It's the 47th event in the history of the official and undisputed World Championship, and on Chess to Impress we continue the build-up by looking at the first 46 matches. We have arrived in 2006. World champion, the classical world champion Vladimir Kramnik defended his title against the FIDE world champion Veselin Topalov. A unification match. How did this come about? After Garry Kasparov, the 13th world champion, split from FIDE in 1993, there were two world chess champions, and I elaborated on that in the previous videos. There were two world champions, the classical world champion, the title that only passed on to a player who defeated the previous world champion, and that was Vladimir Kramnik, who had defeated Garry Kasparov in the year 2000. And the official FIDE world champion, which was determined by various tournament formats. There were knockout formats, there was a round-robin 8-player event, but from 1993 to 2006 no match was ever held between the classical and official champions. But that changed. Veselin Topalov from Bulgaria won the FIDE World Chess Championship in 2005 in San Luis in Argentina. Kramnik, the classical world champion, had been invited, but as classical world champion he refused to play. He did indicate his willingness to play the winner in a match to unify the title. And finally in April 2006, FIDE announced that Kramnik would play Topalov in a World Championship unification match. Hooray! And here we see both players at the board. Finally the chess world would be unified again. Classical world champion Kramnik on the left and the FIDE world champion Topalov on the right. The match was played in Kalmykia, the home of the FIDE president Kirsan Ilyumzhinov. Kramnik had a great start by winning the first two games. Game 3 and 4 were drawn, and then controversy struck. After Game 4, Topalov's manager Danilov complained to the match organizers and the press about Kramnik's repeated visits to the bathroom. He noted that the bathrooms are the only place not under audio or video surveillance, and called the frequency of the breaks strange, if not suspicious. Danilov suggested that Topalov would abandon the match if the concerns were not addressed. The appeals committee determined that, although the frequency of Kramnik's visits to the toilet had been exaggerated, the private bathrooms would be closed and a common toilet opened for both players. In response, Kramnik's manager Karsten Hensel issued a public statement insisting that the original match conditions be adhered to, defending Kramnik's actions by saying the restroom is small and Mr. Kramnik likes to walk and therefore uses the space of the bathroom as well. It should also be mentioned that Mr. Kramnik has to drink a lot of water during the games. Mr. Kramnik will stop playing this match as long as FIDE is not ready to respect Mr. Kramnik's rights, in this case to use the toilet of his own restroom whenever he wishes to do so. All that happened between Game 4 and Game 5, and you can see in this table that Game 5 has an asterisk behind it. Topalov won the game, but that was because Kramnik was sitting on his couch in his restroom waiting for his toilet to be opened. That didn't happen, and Kramnik lost the game after 1 hour without making a move. Kramnik then decided to play on under protest. Game 6 and 7 were drawn. Topalov won Game 8 and 9, taking the lead in the match, but Kramnik hit back straight away in Game 10. The last two games were drawn, which meant the match had to go into a tiebreak. In the tiebreak, with rapid games, Kramnik hit first in Game 14. Topalov came back in Game 15, and then Game 16 came, and that's the game we're going to look at in this video. Let's get into it. It was the fourth rapid game after 12 classical games, and the score was 7.5, 7.5 in the match. If this game would be drawn, then the match would go on to blitz games to decide on the winner. It was played on the 13th of October 2006. The comments I use in this video come from Veselin Topalov in the book he wrote about the match, Topalov Kramnik on the Edge in Elista, and also from the magazine New in Chess, where Kramnik's second Bareyev analyzes this game, and also, and I used this book before, From London to Elista from Bareyev and Levitov. Kramnik white, Topalov black, d4. This was the only match in the history of the World Championship where every game started with d2, d4. Topalov played d5, and we have a Slav defense. Knight f3, knight f6, knight c3 and e6, the semi-Slav. e3 from Kramnik, knight bd7, bishop d3. Now Topalov takes on c4, bishop takes back. The bishop is kicked back, goes to e2, bishop b7, Kramnik castled, and now b4 attacking the knight was played before in this match. But for this game Topalov chose bishop e7. Kramnik pushes in the center, now b4, and e5 counter-attacking black's knight on f6. The knights were taken, bishop takes back, b takes c3, and now c5 from Topalov. Bareyev writes, in case of castling, instead of c5, white has a tempo move rook b1, hitting the bishop. Topalov wrote here that castling is a solid, frequently played continuation, but after winning the previous game I was very optimistic and sought a more complicated position. That's why Topalov played c5. Kramnik took, knight takes, which was a novelty back in 2006. Kramnik gave a check and the king had to play without being castled, king f8. And here Kramnik, to Topalov's surprise, swapped the queens. Bareyev wrote, it looks like white should aim for an attack with the queens on, but although black has not castled, his king seems quite safe. Also the black queen has a nice square on c7, attacking the c3 pawn. And the match had shown that Kramnik was a stronger player in endings. That's why Kramnik swapped the queens. Topalov took back and bishop a3. White's pawn structure is worse than black's, so he must exploit his lead in development by making energetic jumps along the open files and diagonals, writes Bareyev. Rook c8 from Topalov. Knight d4. Bishop e7. Rook fd1, centralizing the rook. a6. Bishop back to f1. And knight a4. Now this bishop is attacking the bishop on a3. And now it gets complicated. Kramnik played a very nice move. Rook ab1. He had calculated this very well in a rapid game. It's counter-attacking the bishop on b7. And tactically it works for white. Topalov writes, white's better development gives him a dangerous initiative. And Bareyev shows the tactical justification of this move. If now black plays bishop d5, now this pawn is hanging, this bishop is still hanging, and this pawn is hanging, then white can take on a6, hitting the rook on c8, and this is the variation that Bareyev gives. Bishop takes a3, white takes on c8, knight takes c3, forking both rooks, rook b8, bishop d6, hitting the rook on b8, rook d3, bishop takes b8, and rook takes c3 with approximate equality, writes Bareyev. And this is a very complicated line which Kramnik had to calculate, this line and some other lines, to justify that rook a2 b1, which he played on move 21, was tactically sound. Topalov saw all that as well and played bishop e4, hitting the rook on b1. The rook went to b3, protecting this bishop. Topalov took it, rook takes, hitting the knight, and the knight went back to c5. Knight b3, king e7, rook d4, and now an important moment. Topalov played his bishop back to g6. A very risky move strategically, removing the bishop from having any influence on the queen side. c4 from Kramnik and rook c6, and that move gets a question mark from Bareyev. Topalov writes, looking for activity, I decided to sacrifice the a-pawn. Bareyev points out that a better way of defending is knight takes b3, and then a takes, and then rook c6, which is keeping the pawn on a6, or rook h d8, creating counterplay. So knight takes b3 was a better option, according to Bareyev, but Topalov played rook c6. Knight takes, rook takes, and there goes the a-pawn. White is now a pawn up. Rook b8, rook d1, rook b2, and rook a7 check, a nice move to keep the king away from the passed pawns, as Topalov explains. The king has to go to f6, away from the a and c pawn, and rook a1. White has now consolidated the position, and the a-pawn is ready for the journey, writes Bareyev. Here bishop b1 was black's last chance. He manages to either win a pawn back or block both white pawns. According to Bareyev, Topalov does not mention this possibility of bishop b1. He played rook f5 instead, hitting f2 with both rooks. So Kramnik played f3, rook e5, and rook a3. The rook is guaranteed a good square along the third rank. Rook c2, rook b3, rook a5. There goes the a-pawn. It's making its first move. King e7, rook b5, rook back, and a5. The a-pawn keeps marching on. King d6, a6, king c7, and c5. White is making great progress with his pawns. Rook c3, preventing white to double rooks on the b file with rook a b1, because the bishop is covering that square. Kramnik plays rook a to a5. He's planning to double up on the b file anyway. Here bishop d3 does not work. Bishop takes, rook takes, and black will be helpless against white's passed pawns. So Topalov chose rook c1 instead, and now black is threatening to win a piece with bishop d3, with a double attack on the pinned bishop. So rook b3 from Kramnik to prevent that. King c6, rook b6 check, king c7, and king f2 to take this bishop d3 option out of the position. The bishop is no longer pinned on f1. Topalov gave a check, king e3. White is winning. Bareyev gives a sample variation of how black can suffer a slow death. He shows this variation if black plays e5, then rook a to b5, doubling on the b file as planned. Black can give a check, king back, rook a8, what else is there? Rook b7 check, king c6, rook a5. Then black can take the pawn on c5, but after bishop b5 check, a very nice move. King d6, there is a7, and white wins. This is how the game could have finished, but after king e3, Topalov, in a very difficult, lost position, blundered. He took on c5 with the rook, and there's a tactical flaw with this move. Kramnik saw it. He gave a check, rook b7 check, wins the game. Topalov looked at the board for a few seconds, then looked at Kramnik and resigned. I remember the pictures quite well. Why is this resignable for black? Well, if you take on b7, then there is rook takes c5 check. And if you counter-attack white's rook, then a takes b7, and you do not have time to pick up the rook because the pawn will promote. Alternatively, if you play king d6, then white takes on c5, and if you take that rook, then white takes black's rook, and if you take on b7 first, then a takes b7, and again you do not have time to collect this rook because of promotion. So after rook b7 check, Topalov resigned. Kramnik won the match 8.5 against 7.5 and was the unified world champion, ending 13 years of having had 2 world championship cycles. Here once again the table. Kramnik won the playoff 2.5, 1.5, and won the match as said by 8.5, 7.5, and this match went down in history as Toiletgate. 1 year later was the next installment of the World Championship, and for the second time in history the World Championship was decided in a tournament. First in 1948 and now in 2007. And how that tournament came about and what happened in it is the subject of the next video. If you want to go back to the start of this 100 days countdown, you should go back to video number 361 on the Chess to Impress channel, and you can see videos on each match in the history of the World Championship. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll keep counting down towards a great match with me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. If you like the video and the series, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.